So you've probably heard of this idea that there is a God-shaped hole inside each one of us, right? An emptiness, a void, a space that only God can fill. It's an idea that comes from Blaise Pascal, the 17th century mathematician, physicist, Catholic theologian, and well-known wagerer, who in his writings theorized that all of our craving, all of our striving, all of our inability to achieve anything resembling true and lasting happiness is an indication that, quote, there was once in us a true happiness, of which all that remains is the empty print and trace. And we try in vain to fill this void with everything we can think of. But nothing really works because, he says, quote, this infinite abyss can be filled only with an infinite and immutable object. In other words, by God, unquote. Hence, a God-shaped hole. Now, on one level, that's kind of a nice image, isn't it? Like a missing puzzle piece that is uniquely God-shaped, and when we find it and put it in, it completes the whole magnificent picture. But on the other hand, the idea of an infinite abyss, a void, a vacuum, a black hole at the center of our being that pulls everything into it, is not an especially comforting idea. But it does make it easy to see how we can get so consumed trying to fill that space up with absolutely everything. We try to fill it with being busy and with all of our anxieties. We try to fill it with material goods and every manner of distraction. And at some point, we might even realize that since vices don't seem to fill it, we might try filling it with virtues instead, with prayer and outreach activities and Bible study. And then Jesus comes along, and what does he do? He runs everybody out. He cleanses the temple. And let's remember that all of those people in the temple, none of them are engaged in anything that anyone would consider to be a problem or unholy. They are actively filling that God-shaped space with righteous things, with godly practices, with time-tested, tradition-laden, religiously prescribed rituals. They are trying their very best to make sure that God is in that space. And Jesus runs them out, clears that space, cleanses the temple. So what are we to make of that? Well, as I thought about it this week, I started to wonder, what if instead of trying to find that God-shaped puzzle piece and fit it into the hole in the temple of our being, what if we took our cue from Jesus and instead did everything we could to protect that space, to keep it open, to keep it empty, to keep it void, so that God always has a place? Years ago, I was in a Bible study where we were discussing Genesis 3. That's the Garden of Eden story. And you know that after Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit, they're banished from the garden, and God puts two things at the gates of Eden: the cherubim, which are fierce, supernatural winged beasts, and something called a fiery, ever-turning sword, which I don't know what it is, but it sounds pretty cool. Now, for years, I assumed that these fearsome things were put at the gates of Eden to keep us out, to keep humans from ever getting back in, sort of like divine bouncers. But in this Bible study, as you do in Bible studies, you actually read the text, and what it actually says is God, quote, drove the humans out and stationed east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and the fiery, ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. God stationed them there to guard the way to the tree of life. And the leader of this Bible study asked, what if those things aren't there to make sure that we can never go back, but are there rather to guard and protect the path, protect the way to the garden, so that when we are ready to come home, the path will be open, and there will still be a place for us to go. A spacious, open garden with the tree of life at its center. What if we viewed our spiritual journey, our faith life, not as a series of obligations or a set of standards that we must meet, a group of tasks we should do and a group that we should not do, and instead viewed it as an ongoing process of clearing, of pruning, shedding, letting go of everything that gets in the way, clearing away all of the things that take up space in us but are not God. What if instead of trying to fill that hole with God, we instead saw it as our duty to keep it empty, to guard its perimeters, perhaps even enlarging it and giving it even more space in our lives so that there is even more room for God? What do you think? Does that sound wise to you or foolish? What is in your temple, your God space, that needs to be cleaned out? And could you develop a zeal for keeping it clear? See, I wonder if we were to shift our focus from trying so hard to fill that space, shifted our focus to tending that space and keeping it open and generous and airy, I wonder if we wouldn't begin to discover other spaces as well, other God-shaped holes. Maybe not within us, but maybe between us, where God also is. And maybe by cultivating the space within us, we could begin to better recognize and more faithfully honor the space between us, the subtle and not so subtle differences between us, where God also is. Could we learn then to see and know God's presence and trust and experience God's grace in how we differ, and learn how to honor and celebrate those differences because that's where God is. I wonder if maybe then we would finally start to see that clear path back to the garden and begin heading there together. Amen.